in thy sight, for you are truly my rock and my redeemer. Amen. I am appreciative of Ricardo doing that piece simply because when you hear spirit, when you hear call and response, you always have to hear it beyond the actual words, because there was always this double entendre at work. There were these songs, and hidden in the songs were these messages that critiqued the unjust situation in which they lived. So you just can't hear them just the words alone. You must hear them through the lens of people desperately wanting to be free. Yes. Let us turn to the program in the back. You guys show them how programs in the back. They help. You know the drill. They help them out, man. What's wrong with you, brother? Thought that was your boy. Okay, all right. And let us turn to the back, to the gospel narrative. John chapter 6. And we're going to read verses 1 through, I'm going to stop at 15. John chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not be enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given them thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Let us stop there. Let us consider the question this morning. Guess who's coming to dinner? Guess who's coming to dinner? This morning's passage tells us that Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs of what he was doing for the sick. It tells us that Jesus went up the mountain and sat down with his disciples. When Jesus looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" According to the text, he said this to test Philip, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages. Not enough to feed all the people that we have here assembled. And then Andrew said to Jesus, there's a boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but that's not enough with all the folk we have assembled. To which Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all, according to the text. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, which means after everyone ate, he told his disciples, gather up the fragments, the leftovers, so that nothing is lost. So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left, we are told it filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign of what had been done, they began to say, this is indeed the prophet who is coming to the world. And when Jesus realized they were about to come to take him by force, he withdrew again by the mountain to be by himself. Now, I believe that sort of summarizes what we just read from this morning's passage. One of the fascinating tidbits about this particular gospel story is that everyone, whether it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, has a feeding the multitude story within their narrative. It is the only miraculous deed of Jesus that all 4 gospel writers record. Now, the common lectionary skipped over Mark's version, which would have been last week, to give us this version this week. Now, there are several differences between John's version, which we read, and Mark's version, which we've been reading a lot of Mark over the last several weeks. Unlike Mark's account, where we actually are unsure to what degree the crowd are aware of the miracle, in John's account, everyone knows what just happened. And the other thing about John's account is that after it happens, the people want to take Jesus by force to make him a king, a political rival to all things Rome. One similarity that runs through both accounts is the disciples were uncertain that the needs of such a large gathering could be met simultaneously. It seems they were caught completely off guard. So in each account we have a similar reaction coming from the disciples. It doesn't matter if it's Mark's version, Luke's version, Matthew's version, John's version. There's sort of this surprise. So they all run to Jesus, sort of like Captain Hepburn when she finds out that her white daughter is bringing home a black fiancé, and she says to Spencer Tracy, guess who's coming to dinner? That's about where we are right now. It's a rich text because this text actually raises more questions for us than it actually gives answers. But in that sense, it's a text much like the human condition that we confront daily that often gives us more questions than it readily provides answers. So it should come as no surprise, given what I just said, that I've got 5 questions for your consideration this morning. I know everybody got scared. We got to go to a picnic, Byron, so don't get nervous. I don't have 5 points to come after the 5 questions, but I do have 5 questions for us to consider. And ultimately, how I answer these questions may be different than how you answer them. But the point is, they are questions that I think we all need to ask while on our spiritual walk. First question. Why did Jesus follow the crowd? Why did the crowd follow Jesus? Why did the crowd follow Jesus? When we look at verse 2, it says, a large crowd kept following him because they saw signs that he was doing for the sick. Now, the obvious response based on the text could be they saw what Jesus could do. Perhaps the more question might therefore be, why do we follow Jesus today? Is it because of miraculous deeds done to someone else? Is it because Some of you read these ancient texts that say you need to do this today. Is it based on a mob mentality where we just follow the crowd? Or is it based on the transformation within your own soul? Obviously, that's not a question I can answer for you, but it is one that each of us must answer for ourselves. For it is a question that is based on our personal relationship with God as we understand it. It is a question that began when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses on the door of the church in Wittenberg, sparking the Reformation, and is summed up beautifully by Billie Holiday when she says to us, Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that has his own. Second question. See, the questions go by fast. Second question. Why did Jesus go to the mountain? Verse 3 says Jesus went up to the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. But what is the significance to us? Jesus takes those following him to higher places, where we are caught in the midst of absurdity, handcuffed by nonsense, confined by someone else's illogical situation. We can only free ourselves if we have the courage to follow Jesus up the mountain that takes us to a higher place of peace. Staying where you are may result in keeping you stuck. It is when we make the decision to be a follower of Jesus' teachings, which means that we're going to commit ourselves to inconvenient love, that we can move to that higher place. It makes no sense to say you're a follower of the teachings of Jesus and not have God's peace as a part of your primary agenda. Which means you've got to be willing to go to that higher place. For it is in that higher place that we realize peace from the chaos that confronts us daily. Now, going to that higher place doesn't mean you won't have challenges, or somehow your challenges will magically go away. But there is something about being in that higher place, that place of peace that allows us to hear the calm voice of God leading us in a new direction. For as we make the trek up the mountain to that higher place, sometimes it may be the rough side of the mountain. I hear Jesus saying to each and every one of us, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Third question. When Jesus looked up, what did he see? This question comes from verse 5, when he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him. Jesus looked up as he looks up now to see us as we are. Not the way we sometimes falsely portray to the world. But he sees us exactly as we are. The good, the bad, and the ugly. When Jesus looks up, he sees the cracks. He sees the imperfections. He sees the limitations. He sees the shortcomings. He sees us in the role of victim, which we remember, as well as the role of victimizer, which we tend to forget. But he sees us through the lens of inconvenient love that demands that we love our neighbors. We love even those folk we may not even like personally. And when he sees us in our less than perfect state, it's not with a question, why did you do that? Or how did you let that happen? But it's rather with a declarative statement, my grace is sufficient, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. Fourth question. Listen, they're going fast. Fourth question. Why did Jesus test Philip? Beginning with the second part of verse 5, Jesus said to Philip, where are you to buy bread for these people to eat? Then in verse 6 it says, he said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. What a strange insertion into the text. If we take this text at face value, one could conclude the multitude is hungry and Jesus is playing games with the disciples. Passages like this one if we're not careful, could create a measure of arrogance in us. As if Jesus posed the question to us,